It's strange how one small thing can stir up a whole part of yourself you thought you'd buried long ago. For me, it was an old camera. I hadn't touched it in years. It had been sitting on a shelf in the barn, gathering dust, forgotten like a piece of another life I used to live. I'd walk past it a dozen times a day, barely noticing it, like it didn't matter anymore. But deep down, I think I knew I was ignoring it on purpose. I didn't want to feel the things it might bring back. The person I used to be. The parts of me I'd tucked away when I moved out here to Silver Pine Farm. That evening, when the sun was setting and casting that soft orange light across the fields, something inside me told me to stop. I leaned against the barn door, just standing there, letting the cool breeze wash over me. The air smelled faintly of hay and earth, and the whole place looked peaceful, almost like it could trick me into thinking everything was fine. And maybe on the surface, it was. People around town always said how lucky I was, how perfect this life seemed, how quiet and simple it must be out here. I'd smile, nod, say the same thing every time. Yeah, I'm lucky. But standing there that evening, staring out at the empty fields, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left a big part of myself behind somewhere. My eyes drifted to that old camera sitting on the shelf inside the barn, right where I'd left it years ago. It felt heavier than it looked, like it held a weight I wasn't ready to carry. It reminded me of a different version of myself, a version I hadn't thought about in a long time. There was a time when that camera was always with me, always hanging from my shoulder. Back then, I used to feel like I could see the world in ways other people didn't. Every shadow, every streak of light, every little detail seemed worth capturing. Photography wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. I chased light, chased moments, chased the feeling of freezing something real and honest in time. It made me feel alive. But somewhere along the way, that girl faded. Maybe it started when I met Marcus. He was steady, certain, everything I wasn't at the time. He made me feel like I didn't have to keep running, like I could finally slow down. And after years of living a life that felt unpredictable and messy, that seemed like exactly what I needed. So when he talked about moving to the farm, about building a quiet, secure life away from the noise, I said yes without hesitation. I thought I could still be me and have all of that too. I thought I could carry my dreams with me and fit them neatly into this new life. But it didn't happen like that. Little by little, the person I used to be faded into the background. It wasn't one big moment, more like a series of small ones. The camera stayed on the shelf. I told myself I'd pick it back up when things settled, when there was time. But time kept slipping away. There were chores to do, animals to care for, meals to cook. Marcus's world became my world, and it seemed easier to just let go of the rest. Years passed, and every time I walked past the camera, it felt like a quiet reminder of something unfinished. Something I'd abandoned, but I told myself I was fine. I told myself this life was enough, until it wasn't. Until that night when I stood there, leaning against the barn door, feeling the weight of everything I'd pushed down bubbling back up. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl who used to carry that camera everywhere was still inside me, waiting. I walked over to it slowly, almost like I was afraid to touch it. My fingers brushed over the worn leather strap, the familiar coolness of the metal body. It felt strange and familiar all at once, like holding onto a piece of myself I hadn't seen in years. For a second, I just stood there, gripping it, feeling its weight settle into my hands. I didn't even lift it to my eye. I just held it, like maybe by doing that, I could remind myself of who I used to be. the person who wasn't afraid to chase after something, who didn't measure life by how safe it was, but by how much she felt alive. And I realized something in that quiet moment. It wasn't the camera that mattered. It was what it represented. It stood for all the parts of me I'd let go of because it seemed easier to shrink myself into a life that looked good on the outside, but left me feeling empty inside. It stood for the freedom I used to feel, the fire I used to have before I convinced myself I had to trade it all in for something steady and predictable. Standing there, the wind tugging at my hair and the fading sunlight spilling over the fields, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. That old camera had been sitting there, waiting for me to remember what it felt like to live for myself again. And maybe it was finally time to stop walking past it, stop ignoring the parts of me I thought I had to leave behind. Maybe it was time to pick it up and see where it could take me next. I guess there are some people who show up in your life like a gust of wind, shaking things up, and no matter how much time passes, they never really leave you. That's how Aiden always was. Even after all these years, I never quite stopped feeling his presence tucked away somewhere deep, like a corner of myself I didn't visit too often, but couldn't ever close off completely. I thought I'd moved past all that, thought I had everything neat and quiet and under control here at Silver Pine. I had my routines, my life with Marcus, the steady rhythm of days blending into each other. Nothing unexpected, nothing wild. And then one afternoon, Aiden just showed up. I wasn't ready for it. Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about him. I was standing by the fence, letting my eyes follow the line of the hills in the distance, my hands resting lightly on the rough wood, the old camera still sitting back in the barn where it had lived untouched for years. It was one of those calm, late afternoons where everything feels still, like the world's taken a breath. But the minute I heard footsteps behind me, something in me shifted. I don't even know why. Just this prickling feeling at the base of my neck, like a memory creeping up before it's fully formed. I turned around, and there he was. Aiden, just standing there like no time had passed, leaning casually against the post, hands tucked into his pockets, wearing that same quiet expression he always had. My heart did something I didn't expect. For a second, I felt like I'd stepped backward into another life. He looked almost the same, maybe a little older, a little rougher around the edges, but still unmistakably him. The way he stood, the way he watched me. It all came rushing back faster than I could process. We stood there in silence for what felt like forever. I think we were both waiting to see who would speak first. My pulse was pounding, and I tried to keep my face neutral, to not let the swirl of emotions show. Finally, I managed to get something out. Aiden. His name felt strange on my tongue, familiar but heavy. Didn't expect to see you here. He gave me a small smile, the corner of his mouth tilting up just enough to be recognizable. Yeah, he said, his voice as calm and steady as I remembered. Didn't expect to be here either. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Where he'd been, why he was back, why now. But I couldn't seem to form them. Instead, we just stood there, the space between us thick with everything we weren't saying. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the dry grass around us, but neither of us moved. He glanced around, eyes flicking over the barn, the paddock, taking in the life I'd built without him. Place looks nice, he said casually, like he was making small talk. But something in his voice told me he wasn't just talking about the ranch. I nodded, unsure how to respond. It's quiet, I finally said, because what else could I offer? It was the truth. Safe. Predictable. Everything I'd told myself I wanted. But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if he could hear the doubt underneath. His gaze settled back on me, and for a long second neither of us looked away. That's when I felt it. The same pull I used to feel all those years ago. The way Aiden had always made me feel like I could breathe differently, like there was more to the world than the boxes I kept trying to fit into. He had a way of seeing me, not the version I carefully put together, but the parts I thought no one noticed. And standing there, in the fading sunlight, I knew he saw right through me even now. "You still shooting?" he asked suddenly, nodding toward the barn, where I knew the old camera sat untouched. I hesitated, my throat tightening. "Not really," I admitted softly. "Haven't for a long time." He didn't say anything for a moment, just kept his eyes on mine. "That's a shame," he murmured, almost like he was saying it to himself. But it hit me hard. I felt the words sink deep, stirring up everything I'd been pushing down. He wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, but somehow it felt like he was reminding me of a truth I didn't want to face, that the life I'd built might look good on the outside, but inside, it felt like something was missing. I shifted, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to shake off the heaviness. "People change," I said quietly, not even sure who I was trying to convince. Aiden just gave a soft nod, but his eyes stayed steady on mine, like he was waiting for me to say more. I couldn't. Not yet. So instead, we let the silence stretch between us again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt charged, like there was a conversation hanging there, unspoken, but understood. After a while, he pushed off the fence, his movement slow and deliberate. "Well," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. "I'm around. If you ever want to catch up." He gave me one last look, something quiet and knowing behind his eyes. And then he walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. I watched him disappear down the dirt path, feeling like something inside me had cracked open. And no matter how much I tried to stay still to stay safe, I knew nothing felt the same anymore. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything his return stirred up. The memories, the questions, the parts of myself I'd been trying to ignore. And now that they were awake, I wasn't sure how to quiet them again. It's funny how you can sense something's coming before it actually happens. Like the air shifts, even if no one else notices it. That's exactly how I felt the day Marcus showed up earlier than usual. I didn't need a clock to tell me something was off. I knew it the moment I heard his truck tires crunching over the gravel, way before sunset, way before I expected him. Usually, he stayed late in the city. His work always kept him there longer. Meetings, calls, last-minute things he couldn't ignore. It became normal, part of the routine. He'd come back tired, quiet, the way we both had been lately. So when I heard the truck pulling in early, my stomach sank before I even saw him. I was still out by the barn, standing in that same spot I always ended up, my thoughts stuck somewhere between the past and whatever mess was brewing inside me. I'd been thinking about Aiden again, how he'd shown up out of nowhere, how easily he cracked something open in me without even trying. I'd spent the afternoon trying to shake it off, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. But the second Marcus's headlights swept across the yard, all those thoughts got tangled up with something heavier. I felt caught before anything had even been said. I stood there, gripping the edge of the barn door, listening as his engine turned off, the sound cutting sharp in the quiet. He didn't get out right away, and for a second, I wondered if maybe he was sitting there trying to figure out how to start whatever conversation he had waiting for me. Eventually, I saw him step out, his usual careful movements, shoulders squared like he was bracing himself. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just walked toward me, slow and steady, every step feeling like it echoed too loud. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral, like maybe if I stayed calm, everything else would stay in place too. He stopped a few feet away, eyes scanning over me, then flicking toward the barn like he already knew what he'd find there. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice even. "Didn't think you'd be home this early," I said, forcing a small smile. Marcus didn't return it. His jaw tightened slightly, eyes narrowing just a little before he spoke. "Wrapped up sooner than I thought," he said simply, but his tone had that edge to it. Not angry, exactly, just clipped, controlled, like he was measuring every word. There was a pause after that, long enough to feel uncomfortable. He looked past me, out toward the fields, then back at me. I could feel it coming, whatever he wasn't saying. "You've been spending a lot of time out here," he said finally, nodding toward the barn. His eyes flicked to the camera sitting there on the shelf like he'd noticed it too. My chest tightened. I shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "Just clearing my head," I mumbled. It was the truth, but it sounded weak even to me. Marcus didn't say anything for a beat, then took a slow step closer, his gaze sharper now. "And Aiden?" he asked, voice low but deliberate, like he was testing how much I'd admit. That one hit like a punch to the gut. I felt my whole body tense. I looked away, suddenly unable to hold his stare. "What about him?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear how thin it sounded. "He didn't buy it." Of course he didn't. Marcus had always been good at reading me, even when I didn't want him to. His mouth pressed into a hard line, and for a second, he didn't speak. Just stood there, arms crossed, eyes drilling into me like he was waiting for me to crack first. "You're different lately," he said quietly, but every word landed heavy. "Not here. Not with me. I can feel it." My throat felt tight. I wanted to deny it, to smooth over whatever was happening between us. But how do you lie when someone's already staring straight at the truth? I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He shook his head slightly, letting out a breath like he was trying to hold something in. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked, voice softer now, but still edged with something sharp. That question sat between us like a wall, one I wasn't sure how to climb. Because the truth was, I didn't even know how to explain what was happening inside me. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something, staring down, unsure how to step forward without losing everything I'd built. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, I just stood there, heart pounding, my hands gripping the edge of the barn door like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Marcus stared at me for another long second, then glanced back toward the truck, his jaw working like he was fighting the urge to say more. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. "I don't want to fight," he said, "but I can't keep pretending I don't notice. Something's changed." I bit the inside of my cheek, willing myself not to break down right there. I could feel everything unraveling, the distance, the tension, the years of silence we both pretended didn't exist. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Marcus let out a breath and gave a small, almost resigned shake of his head. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the truck, leaving me standing there in the fading light, feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted for good. I watched as he drove off, the dust kicking up behind his tires, the sound of the engine fading into nothing. I stood there long after he was gone, staring out at the empty fields, feeling that familiar ache settle deep in my chest. The space between us had been growing for a long time, so slowly I almost didn't notice it until now. But suddenly, it felt impossible to ignore. And standing there alone, all I could think about was how far away I felt from the life I thought I'd built. After Marcus drove off that evening, I stayed out by the barn for a long time. The light faded, and the air cooled. But I couldn't bring myself to move. My hands rested on the rough wooden fence, and my eyes drifted out toward the empty fields. But my mind was somewhere far away, somewhere I hadn't let it go in a long time. I kept thinking back to the version of me that used to live for moments like this, the quiet ones, when the world slows down just enough to catch its breath. Back then, I would have had my camera slung around my neck, chasing that perfect slant of light as the sun dipped below the horizon. I would have been excited, restless, driven by something I couldn't even explain, always looking for the next shot, the next story to tell. But that girl felt like a stranger now. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that same kind of spark, that same hunger to create, to explore. It's strange how life pulls you in directions you never planned, how one choice, one decision, can set off a chain reaction you can't undo. I never meant to give up that part of myself. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual. So gradual I didn't even see it happening. When I met Marcus, I thought I could have both. I thought I could be the artist and the partner, keep my freedom, and still build something stable. But life has a way of asking you to choose, even when you don't realize that's what you're doing. He offered me something I didn't know I craved until he said it out loud. Security, consistency, a home without all the unpredictability I'd grown so used to. And I wanted it. I wanted to feel grounded, to stop running from one uncertain thing to the next. So I told myself it wouldn't be a sacrifice, that I could still hold on to my photography, my passions, while fitting into this life we were building together. I told myself it was just a pause, that after we settled in at Silver Pine, after we got the farm running smoothly, after things calmed down, I'd pick it all back up again. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped reaching for my camera, stopped looking for the beauty in the small things, stopped feeling like that version of myself even existed anymore. I filled my days with chores, with making sure everything ran the way it should. Marcus poured himself into his work, and I poured myself into the spaces he left behind, keeping the house, tending the horses, taking care of the details. And little by little, it felt easier to let the rest of it fade. Easier not to think about the girl who used to dream about gallery openings and spontaneous road trips, who used to lose herself in the magic of capturing life in a single frame. I think the hardest part was convincing myself I didn't miss it. Telling myself I'd outgrown that life, that this quiet stability was enough. But deep down, there was always this ache, this whisper that wouldn't quite go away. It would creep in at night, when the house felt too quiet and the weight of the silence pressed against my chest. Or in the afternoons, when I'd catch a certain kind of light streaming through the window, and for a split second, I'd feel that old pull to grab my camera, only to remind myself it was gathering dust in the barn. I buried it, pushed it down, told myself I was being foolish, that chasing those dreams belonged to a younger, wilder version of me I didn't have room for anymore, and I thought I could keep living like that forever, just going through the motions, pretending it didn't matter. But lately, all of it's been creeping back in, louder, sharper, harder to ignore. Especially after seeing Aiden again. It's like he carried a piece of that old world with him, the one I thought I'd left behind for good. Just standing near him reminded me of who I used to be, before I started trading pieces of myself for the promise of something safer. And now, with Marcus pulling away and the distance between us stretching wider than ever, I can't help but wonder if I've made a mistake. If, somewhere along the line, I let go of something too important to get back. I keep asking myself if I've spent all these years trying to fit into a life that was never really mine to begin with. If the quiet, predictable days were worth the cost of losing the parts of me that used to feel alive. I don't have the answers yet. Maybe I won't for a while. But standing there that night, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the hills, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. The life I chose might have looked perfect from the outside, but inside, something's been missing for far too long. And no matter how much I try to silence it, that part of me, the part that used to dream, to create, to feel free, is still there, waiting for me to decide if I'm ready to find her again. I think deep down, I knew it was coming. You can only ignore something for so long before it demands to be dealt with. That's exactly how it felt the night Marcus and I finally collided, after weeks, maybe months, of walking around each other like we didn't see the cracks forming between us. I was in the kitchen when it happened, standing at the counter, pretending to busy myself with something simple. Chopping vegetables, cleaning up dishes, anything to keep my hands moving so I didn't have to sit still and feel the weight pressing down on me. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Marcus had been gone longer than normal lately, staying in the city, tied up in meetings or excuses I didn't bother questioning. And when he was home, the space between us felt almost too loud. I could feel him watching me, feel the things we weren't saying clinging to every corner of the room. That night, he walked in just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't turn right away, kept my eyes on what I was doing, hoping maybe he'd say something light, something easy to break the tension. But I could feel it radiating off him, the tightness in his shoulders, the way he didn't set down his things like he usually did. He stood there for a moment, and then his voice came, quiet, but sharp. "Isla, we can't keep doing this." My hands froze. For a second, I stared down at the cutting board, at the knife resting still, before slowly turning to face him. His expression was unreadable, calm on the surface, but his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed too hard on mine. I swallowed, heart thudding in my chest. "Doing what?" I asked, even though I already knew. His lips pressed together, and he shook his head slightly, like he was holding something back. "This," he said, voice low. "This pretending. You're not here, not really. And I can't keep acting like I don't notice." The words felt like they echoed in the space between us, bouncing off the walls until they landed squarely in my chest. I opened my mouth, trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. He took a step closer, eyes never leaving mine. "You've been distant for a long time," he continued, softer now but still firm. "I tried to give you space. I thought maybe it was just a phase. But it's not, is it?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter behind me, needing something solid to hold on to. "Marcus," I started, but my voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. He didn't stop. "I see how you look when you're out by the barn," he said, his tone rough. "How you've been since he showed up." I felt my stomach drop. Aiden. Of course that's what this was about. But it wasn't just about him. It never had been. Marcus's eyes searched my face, waiting for me to deny it, to say something that would make it all go back to normal. But I couldn't. I stayed quiet, feeling my pulse pound louder in my ears. He let out a breath, shaking his head. "I don't know what's going on inside you," he said, voice lower now, almost like he was tired. "But I can't fix it if you won't talk to me." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I don't know how to explain it," I whispered, and it was the truth. How do you put into words the slow erosion of yourself? How do you explain that it's not about one person or one moment, but this steady, quiet losing of who you are over time? He stepped back slightly, his shoulders tense. "Is it him?" he asked, softer now, but the hurt bleeding through. "Is that what this is?" I shook my head, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "It's not about Aiden," I said, voice shaking. "It's about me." He stared at me like he wanted to believe me but didn't know how. I took a breath, feeling my throat tighten. "I've spent so long trying to fit into this life we built," I said quietly. Trying to convince myself it was enough. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself, Marcus. And I don't know how to get back. The words hung there between us, raw and heavy. I could see the way they landed, the way his jaw clenched, his hands flexing, like he didn't know what to do with them. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking on the wall. Then he exhaled, voice low, almost defeated. "I don't know how to fix that," he said simply. And that was the truth, too. There wasn't a fix. Not something he could do, not something I could smooth over. I'd been running on autopilot for so long, convincing myself that if I just kept moving, I wouldn't have to face the fact that I didn't feel like myself anymore. But here we were, all of it out in the open. No more hiding. No more pretending. Marcus looked at me one last time, something unreadable flickering across his face, then turned and walked toward the door. I watched him go, feeling like something inside me had cracked wide open. The truth hurts. It rips away the walls you've built to keep everything neat and manageable. But standing there in the empty kitchen, my heart pounding and my hands trembling, I realized maybe it's the only way anything real can start again. The house felt too quiet after Marcus left. It wasn't like he slammed the door or made some dramatic exit. He just walked out, and the silence that followed settled heavy in every room, like it had been waiting there all along. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sound of his truck faded down the road, staring at nothing in particular, just letting my fingers trace patterns on the wood. My coffee had gone cold. The dishes sat in the sink, untouched. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same anymore. I kept thinking about the way he'd looked at me before he walked away. Tired, maybe hurt, but mostly like he knew there was nothing more to say. And honestly, I didn't have anything left to say either. The truth was already out, and it wasn't something either of us could take back. I knew deep down we'd been drifting apart for a long time, both of us holding onto a version of life we thought we were supposed to have. But facing it head on still left me feeling raw and exposed. I sat there until the light outside shifted, turning that soft golden shade that always marked the end of the day. Normally, I'd have gotten up to start dinner or folded some laundry, filling the time with things to keep my mind busy. But tonight, I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up slowly, almost like my body was moving before my mind had caught up, and I walked out the back door without even thinking about where I was headed. My feet carried me across the yard, past the fence, straight toward the barn. The air smelled faintly of hay and dust, and the light spilled through the cracks in the wooden walls in long, glowing lines. It was quiet, except for the sound of my boots scuffing the floorboards. My eyes landed on the old camera sitting on the shelf, right where it had been all this time. I don't know what it was about that moment, but something in me finally broke free. Without hesitation, I walked over and picked it up, brushing my fingers across the worn leather strap and the familiar metal body. It felt heavier than I remembered, but solid, like it belonged in my hands. I stood there for a second, holding it close, letting the weight of it settle into me. And then I stepped outside. The light was perfect. The kind of soft, fading light that used to make me drop everything and grab my camera without thinking. I walked out to the edge of the paddock, where moonlight stood grazing lazily, his white coat catching the last streaks of sun. I lifted the camera to my face, peering through the viewfinder, and for the first time in years, I felt something click into place, not just the shutter, but something deeper. I framed the shot, let my finger rest on the button, and captured the moment. Just like that, the sound of the shutter snapped through the air, and it was like I could breathe again. I took a few more photos. Nothing fancy, nothing planned, just whatever caught my eye. The way the grass swayed in the breeze, the curve of moonlight's neck, the shadows stretching long across the dirt. It wasn't about creating something perfect. It was about remembering how it felt to see the world through that lens again. And in that small, simple act, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until now. This quiet moment, me and the camera, no expectations, was mine. It wasn't for Marcus or Aiden or anyone else. It was a part of me I thought I'd lost, but it had been here all along, waiting for me to pick it back up. I stood there until the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the fields in a soft, dusky glow, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt still. Not stuck, not restless, just present. When I finally walked back toward the barn, the camera hanging from my neck, there was no big revelation, no sudden clarity about what came next. But there was something else, a quiet understanding that whatever path I took, it had to start with me. No more shrinking myself to fit into someone else's life. No more pretending that staying safe meant staying whole. That night, as I sat on the porch, the stars starting to blink awake overhead, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd taken one small step back toward myself. And that was enough. For now, it was enough.